They dragged her toward the river at dawn. The water was calm, too calm, reflecting the pale sky like a sheet of glass. Women shouted. Men argued. A child cried. And in the middle of it all, the blind girl screamed as if she could see something no one else could. "No," she begged, her fingers clawing at the dry earth. "Please. Not the water." Her bare heels carved lines in the dirt as they pulled her closer. The smell of wet reeds reached her, and she thrashed violently, her thin body shaking with a terror that made grown men hesitate. Someone tried to splash water onto her face. She shrieked. Not from pain, from horror. The sound cut through the village like a blade. Birds exploded from the trees. The river rippled, disturbed for the first time that morning. The girl curled inward, covering her face, whispering words no one understood. "I won't," she sobbed. "I never will." A hand hesitated inches from the water. Silence fell. The blind girl lay trembling on the riverbank, untouched by the river that gave life to everything around it. Crops, animals, children, the village itself. And no one could explain why the water terrified her more than death. By midday, the village returned to its rhythm, as it always did. The river that had caused so much fear that morning flowed quietly again, its surface broken only by the slow steps of women wading in to wash clothes. Laughter rose and fell with the splashing water. Children chased each other along the bank, their feet muddy, their hands sticky with roasted maize. Life did not pause for confusion. It never had. Huts made of clay and straw stood in a loose circle beneath the sun, their walls warm to the touch. Smoke drifted lazily from cooking fires, carrying the smell of cassava and groundnuts through the air. Goats bleated. A rooster crowed long after it should have stopped. An old man repaired a fishing net in the shade, humming a tune older than the village itself. This was a place built on routine. At dawn, water was fetched. At noon, food was shared. At dusk, stories were told. The river was at the center of everything: life, survival, memory. Babies were bathed in it days after birth. Elders were washed with it before burial. In times of sickness, water carried medicine. In times of drought, prayers were spoken over it. No one feared it. Except her. The blind girl sat just beyond the center of the village, on the dry ground where the earth cracked into pale lines. She always chose the same spot, where dust clung to skin and nothing grew. Her legs were folded neatly beneath her. Her hands rested calmly in her lap. If you didn't know what had happened that morning, you might think she was simply listening. She never asked for water. That was the first thing people noticed about her, long before the screaming, long before the riverbank. Even on the hottest days, when tongues cracked and throats burned, she never reached for the clay pots. When someone placed a gourd near her, she gently pushed it away with a polite smile, as if refusing a gift she did not deserve. "I'm fine," she would say softly. Her voice was always steady. "Fine." Untroubled. The women whispered as they worked. They did not speak loudly. Whispers carried better when wrapped in caution. "She hasn't washed in days," one murmured. "She never does," another replied. "Not with water." They watched as the girl traced patterns in the dirt with her fingers, slow and deliberate, as if reading something written only for her. Dust coated her hands, her arms, her face. Still, she looked peaceful. A boy ran past her, nearly colliding with her shoulder. He stopped, startled. "Sorry," he said. She smiled toward the sound of his voice. "Be careful," she replied, warm and gentle. There was nothing strange about her manners. Nothing cruel. Nothing wild. And yet, the memory of her terror clung to the village like smoke. Men passed by carrying buckets from the river. The water inside shimmered, alive with reflected light. Each step sloshed softly. The girl's body stiffened, not much, just enough for a careful eye to notice. Her fingers curled tighter into her palms. She did not turn away. She simply listened. Life went on around her, normal, grounded, familiar. The river gave. The people took. The sun moved slowly across the sky. But beneath the calm, a question settled quietly into the village, heavy and unresolved. How could someone live surrounded by water, and refuse to touch it at all? No one remembered when the blind girl first arrived in the village. Some said she had always been there, sitting on the dry ground at the edge of things, as familiar as the baobab tree or the bend in the river. Others insisted she came one season without warning, led by no one, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a calm that felt borrowed. What everyone agreed on was this: she never asked for help. She moved through the village slowly, counting her steps, her bare feet careful to avoid wet soil. Even after the rains, when puddles formed everywhere and mud swallowed sandals, she found paths of dryness no one else noticed. If a drop of water splashed near her ankle, she froze, breath held, waiting until the earth drank it in. Then she continued. Her blindness was obvious, but it did not weaken her. She tilted her head when people spoke, as if seeing them through sound. She recognized voices instantly. She laughed at the right moments. She remembered small kindnesses and returned them tenfold. When children scraped their knees, she tore strips from her own cloth to bind them, dry cloth, always dry. When elders needed company, she sat beside them for hours, listening. She spoke little of herself. When asked where she came from, she smiled and said, "From before." No one knew what that meant. The girl slept alone, in a small hut made for her by the villagers. Inside, everything was arranged with careful precision. Her mat never touched damp ground. Her belongings were wrapped in layers of cloth. Even the air inside smelled different, dusty, warm, untouched by moisture. One evening, a young woman tried to help her. "You should wash," she said gently, holding out a calabash of clean river water. "It will cool you." The blind girl's smile faltered. She reached out, then stopped inches away. Her hand trembled, as if the water carried heat instead of relief. Slowly, she pulled back. "I don't need it," she whispered. "Everyone needs water," the woman replied. The girl lowered her head. "Not everyone," she said. That was all. At night, when the village slept, some claimed they heard her whispering to the earth. Not prayers. Not words of fear. Warnings, maybe, or promises. No one ever got close enough to know. What unsettled people most was not her refusal. It was her awareness. She knew when someone approached with wet hands. She sensed rain before clouds gathered. When thunder rolled in the distance, she shifted further from the river without being told. Once, during a sudden storm, she stood perfectly still while everyone ran, then turned her face away seconds before the first drop fell. "How did you know?" someone asked later. She smiled faintly. "It announces itself." The villagers began to watch her more closely. Kindness did not explain fear this deep. Blindness did not explain precision this sharp. And silence did not explain why her body reacted to water as if it were something alive, something that remembered her. Still, she caused no harm. She broke no rules. She only refused one thing. Yet with each passing day, a quiet unease grew stronger. Because the blind girl did not treat water like a gift. She treated it like a truth she could not afford to touch. The whispers began as they always did, soft, uncertain, carried on routine conversations. At the riverbank, women spoke of the blind girl while scrubbing cloth against smooth stones. In the market, men lowered their voices when she passed. No one accused her of anything. Not yet. But curiosity had shifted into something heavier, something edged with discomfort. It was no longer just that she avoided water. It was how far she would go to avoid it. One afternoon, a child fell into a shallow stream near the fields. The water barely reached his knees, but panic spread quickly. Before anyone else reacted, the blind girl moved. She ran toward the sound of splashing, faster than anyone had ever seen her move. Then she stopped. The stream lay between her and the child. She froze, breath ragged, feet planted in the dry soil. The child cried, reaching out. The blind girl reached back, hands extended, fingers shaking, then recoiled as water splashed toward her. Another villager pulled the child out moments later. No one was hurt. But everyone saw. The girl collapsed to her knees on the dry ground, shaking violently, pressing her forehead into the dust as if asking the earth to forgive her. She did not cry. She did not scream. She whispered. "I can't," she said again and again. "I can't." That night, the elders met beneath the acacia tree. They spoke of balance, of harmony, of the river as a living presence that demanded respect. One elder reminded them that refusing water was refusing life. Another warned that fear, left unanswered, could spread like rot. "She brings unease," someone said. "She brings questions," another replied. No decision was made, but eyes began to follow her wherever she went. Soon, small things started to feel wrong. Calabashes cracked when placed too close to her. Dew vanished from the ground where she slept. During a light rain, her hut remained dry while others leaked. People noticed these things and pretended not to. Then came the drought. It was not sudden. The river did not disappear overnight. It simply began to pull away, inch by inch. Water levels dropped. Fish became scarce. Crops leaned weakly toward the sun. The blind girl moved even farther from the river. Some villagers saw this as proof. "She knows something," they whispered. Others saw it as blame. "She angers the water," they said. One morning, a woman confronted her openly. "Why do you hate what keeps us alive?" she demanded. The blind girl turned toward her voice, calm but exhausted. "I don't hate it," she replied. "Then touch it." Silence fell. "I can't," the girl said quietly. The woman's voice cracked. "Because you won't, or because you're afraid of what will happen?" The blind girl did not answer. That night, the dreams began. Several villagers dreamed of water rising without sound, of hands beneath the surface, of a girl standing dry while the world drowned. They woke with their hearts racing, unable to explain the images. By now, fear had replaced curiosity. The elders decided something had to be done. If the girl would not explain herself, the water would force the truth out of her. At dawn, they came for her. Not with anger. Not with violence. With certainty. They believed the river would cleanse whatever darkness clung to her. That once she touched the water, balance would return. As they led her toward the riverbank, the blind girl did not resist at first. But when she smelled the water, fresh, cold, waiting, her body went rigid. And for the first time since she arrived in the village, her voice rose, sharp and broken with urgency. "If I touch it," she said, "you will all regret it." No one listened. And the river watched in silence. The village did not see itself as cruel. That was the most dangerous part. They told themselves they were acting out of care, out of tradition, out of responsibility to one another. The drought had tightened throats and sharpened tempers. When water becomes scarce, patience follows it into the ground. At sunrise, the blind girl was no longer allowed to sit at the edge of the village. She was brought to the center. Not bound. Not dragged. Simply surrounded. Women stood with crossed arms. Men held staffs more tightly than necessary. Children were pulled back, told to watch but not speak. The elders formed a half-circle, their faces grave, their voices steady. "You will go to the river today," one of them said. "You will wash. You will drink. And this fear will end." The blind girl stood barefoot on the dry earth, her head bowed. She listened to every breath, every shift of weight. The smell of dust told her she was still safe, for now. "I have lived among you in peace," she said softly. "I have harmed no one." "That is not the question," an elder replied. "The question is what you bring with you." She swallowed. "I bring silence." A murmur spread through the crowd. They began to walk. Step by step, the village moved as one toward the river. The blind girl walked in the middle, guided by hands that were no longer gentle. The air grew cooler. The scent of wet earth crept closer. Her breathing changed, shorter, shallower. Someone offered her a gourd. "Drink," they insisted. "Prove you are not cursed." She turned her face away. The crowd's mood shifted. Sympathy cracked. Fear bled into anger. "You scream like a child," a man snapped. "Yet you say nothing." The blind girl stopped walking. "I say nothing," she replied, her voice trembling, "because some truths cannot be unspoken." They resumed. By the time the river came into earshot, the tension was unbearable. The water murmured softly, indifferent, ancient. The blind girl's hands curled into fists so tight her nails cut into her skin. At the bank, she dropped to her knees. "No," she whispered. Please." The elders hesitated. Behind them, crops lay thirsty. Children lay hungry. The village stood on the edge of loss, and the girl, this quiet, unexplainable presence, felt suddenly like a weight they could no longer carry. A man stepped forward and dipped his hand into the river. "Just a touch," he said. "That's all." The blind girl recoiled violently, scrambling backward, choking on breath. The crowd gasped as if struck by her terror. She covered her face, rocking, whispering words that tangled together, fragments, names, promises. Then she said something that froze everyone. "It doesn't forget," she whispered. "It waits." The man hesitated, but only for a moment. He reached for her wrist. The instant his wet fingers brushed her skin, the river surged. Not violently, not loudly, just enough to break its silence. Water climbed the bank by inches. The ground darkened. A cold wind passed through the crowd. Birds lifted from the trees, screaming. The blind girl cried out, not in fear, but in grief. "I warned you," she sobbed. The man stumbled back, staring at his soaked hand as if it no longer belonged to him. The elders exchanged frightened looks. The river's surface rippled unnaturally, though no one touched it. The village stood frozen between belief and denial. They had wanted obedience. Instead, they had awakened something watching. And the water, at last, had begun to respond. The river did not rise all at once. That was what frightened them most. It crept forward slowly, patiently, as if testing the ground, claiming a little more earth with every breath the village took. The bank softened. Footprints filled with dark water and did not disappear. No one spoke. The blind girl remained on her knees, her hands pressed flat against the dust, as though anchoring herself to what was left of dry land. Her body trembled, but her voice had gone quiet. Too quiet. An elder cleared his throat. "This is coincidence," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Rivers swell." But the sky was clear. The wind had stilled. There was no rain upstream. No reason. A child screamed as water touched his toes. His mother dragged him back, eyes wide, heart pounding. The crowd began to retreat, step by careful step, away from the river's edge. All except the blind girl. She did not move. "Get her away from it," someone shouted. Two men reached for her arms. The moment their shadows crossed the water, the surface churned. Small waves slapped against the bank, soaking their feet. They pulled back instinctively, fear flashing across their faces. The blind girl lifted her head. "I told you," she said hoarsely. "It remembers." "What does it remember?" one elder demanded. She shook her head. "I can't say it. Not here." The water surged again, higher this time. Panic rippled through the village. People ran for higher ground, clutching children, baskets, whatever they could carry. Huts closest to the river groaned as water crept inside, soaking mats, swallowing stored grain. The river was no longer a resource. It was a presence. And it was focused. The blind girl rose slowly to her feet. The ground around her remained dry in a perfect circle, as though the earth itself refused to betray her. That was when the shouting began. "She controls it. She brought this. Make her stop." Accusation replaced fear. Fear demanded a target. The elders gathered, voices urgent, arguing over one another. Some wanted to push her into the water, believing it would break whatever hold she had. Others wanted her driven away, far from the village, anywhere the river could not follow. The blind girl listened to it all. Then she took a step toward the water. A collective gasp tore through the crowd. "No!" an elder shouted. "Don't!" She stopped inches from the wet soil. Her foot hovered, shaking, above the darkened ground. Sweat ran down her face. Her lips parted as if she were holding back a scream. "I have held it back," she said, her voice barely audible over the rushing water. "For years." Held what back? The question hung in the air, unanswered. She lowered her foot, but did not touch the water. The river roared in response, surging higher, spilling violently over the bank. A hut collapsed with a wet crack. People screamed. The ground vanished beneath swirling brown current. The blind girl cried out in pain, clutching her chest. "Stop!" she begged, not to the people, but to the water itself. "Please. Not them." Her words cut through the chaos. She wasn't commanding it. She was pleading. An elder stared at her, realization dawning. "You're not afraid of the water," he whispered. "You're afraid of what happens when you touch it." She nodded, tears streaking through the dust on her cheeks. "I was told never to," she said. "If I did, it would remember me." Another surge crashed against the village. People were screaming now, running, praying. The blind girl stood at the edge of disaster, shaking, alone, bearing the weight of something no one else could see. "I kept my promise," she whispered. "All this time." The river answered with a thunderous roar. And everyone understood too late. The water wasn't punishing her. It was responding to her restraint. And if that restraint broke, nothing would stop what came next. The village was no longer a village. It was a scattering of frightened bodies clinging to whatever ground remained above the water. The river had swallowed paths, gardens, memories. Clay walls dissolved into mud. The air smelled of wet earth and panic. And at the center of it all stood the blind girl. She had not moved. Water rushed around her feet, stopping just short, as if held back by an invisible line. Her breathing was uneven now, each breath a struggle. The strain showed in her posture, in the way her shoulders sagged, in the way her hands shook as though holding something far heavier than her own body. An elder waded forward, water up to his knees. "What are you?" he shouted over the roar. She flinched at the sound of his voice. "I am what was left," she said. Another wave surged, slamming into the remaining huts. A woman screamed as her roof collapsed. Children cried, clinging to their mothers. "Enough!" the elder cried. "End this!" The blind girl's face twisted with pain. "I am ending it," she whispered. "This is me ending it." She fell to her knees as if struck from above. Her palms pressed into the mud, and for the first time, the water did not pull away from her touch. It trembled. The ground beneath her darkened. A hush fell, not because the river softened, but because everyone felt it. This was the moment. She raised her head, tears mixing with rain that had begun to fall from a sky that had been clear only moments before. "They told me," she said, her voice breaking, "that if I ever touched the water again, it would finish what it started." A crack of thunder split the air. The villagers stared, frozen between terror and revelation. "Who told you?" someone screamed. She did not answer. Her hands trembled harder now, fingers sinking deeper into the wet earth. The invisible boundary around her shrank. Water lapped at her skin, cold and alive. She gasped. The river responded instantly, surging higher, angrier, no longer patient. "No!" she cried. "Stop! I'm here!" The words rang with desperation. She wasn't fighting the water. She was offering herself to it. The elders understood then. Her distance from the river had never been defiance. It had been containment. "What did you do?" the elder whispered. The blind girl turned toward him, her sightless eyes full of unbearable sorrow. "I survived," she said. The rain intensified, hammering down. The river roared louder than ever before, rising past waists, past chests. People fled for the highest ground, abandoning everything. The blind girl remained kneeling, water now swirling around her legs. Her body shook violently. Each second cost her something: strength, breath, control. "I held it back," she whispered again, "because it followed me. Because it listens." A child cried out her name. She turned toward the sound, her face softening despite the chaos. "I'm sorry," she said gently. "I tried." The water surged one final time, slamming into the village with unstoppable force. The elder shouted, "What do you need?" The blind girl closed her eyes. "I need to finish what began," she said, "before it takes you all." She drew in a deep, shuddering breath and placed both hands fully into the water. The river screamed. Not like water. Like memory being torn open. The ground shook. The current twisted violently toward her, pulling, claiming. People watched in horror as the water finally touched her skin. And in that instant, everyone understood, this was not a battle. It was a sacrifice, and whatever truth lay beneath. The surface was about to rise, with or without mercy. The moment her hands entered the river, the world seemed to tilt. The roar softened, not into silence, but into something deeper, heavier. The water slowed, thickening as if remembering how to breathe. Waves that had clawed at the village hesitated mid-surge, trembling around the blind girl's arms. She cried out, not in pain, but in recognition. "I remember," she whispered. The rain stopped. Clouds hung frozen above, swollen and dark, yet unmoving. The villagers stood scattered across what little dry ground remained, watching as the river curled inward, pulling itself toward the girl like a living thing returning home. The elder stepped forward, voice shaking. "Tell us," he said, "what are you to the water?" The blind girl swallowed hard. Her body shook as if resisting an immense pull. "I was born beside it," she said. "Before this village stood where it does now. Before the river bent its path." Images flooded her mind, and somehow everyone felt them. A different river. Wilder. Hungrier. A season of endless rain. Water that rose too fast, too strong. A night of screaming. Homes torn away. People pulled under by a current that did not forgive. "I was a child," she continued. "I could see then." The river surged softly, as if confirming her words. "My mother carried me into the water," she said. She knew. She had always known. The river had chosen me. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "She begged it," the blind girl said, tears streaming freely now. "She offered herself." But the river wanted more than a life. It wanted a bond. The current tightened around her wrists. "I was taken," she whispered. "Not drowned. Claimed." The villagers felt it then, the weight of it. Not magic. Not curse. Covenant. "When the water released me," the girl said, "I was alive. But I could no longer see the world." She lifted her face, rainwater still clinging to her lashes. "I could only feel it." The elder's voice broke. "Why you?" "Because the river was angry," she replied. "And someone had to hold that anger." The water around her stilled completely. "They told me," she went on, "that if I ever touched it again by choice, the bond would wake fully. Everything it held back, all the deaths, all the floods, would come rushing through me." Her hands clenched beneath the surface. "So I stayed away," she said. "I lived on dust. I chose thirst. I carried the weight so others wouldn't have to." A woman sobbed openly now. Men lowered their heads. "The drought," the elder whispered. "The fear. It was never punishment." The blind girl nodded. "It was restraint." The river had been held tight for years, its power pressed inward by a single fragile human body refusing contact. Balance demanded release, but release did not have to mean destruction. Her breathing grew shallow. "I can't hold it any more," she said softly. "But I can guide it." The river began to move again, not outward, not violent, but downward. The water level dropped slowly, retreating from the village, flowing back into its rightful course. Fields reappeared. Foundations emerged from the mud. The blind girl screamed, not from fear, but from effort. The bond burned through her like fire and ice combined. "I give it back," she cried. "Enough to live. Not enough to destroy." The water obeyed. When the river finally stilled, it rested calmly within its banks, as if nothing had happened. The blind girl collapsed forward. The elders ran to her, pulling her from the water, laying her gently on dry ground. She was breathing, barely. Her hands were scarred now, pale and trembling. The elder knelt beside her, tears falling freely. "You protected us," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "I always did," she said. And for the first time since she arrived, the village understood. The girl who never touched water had been holding back a river's grief with her own life. The village woke the next morning to silence. Not the fearful silence of waiting, but the soft, ordinary quiet of a world that had decided to keep going. The river flowed gently within its banks, clear and patient, as it had before fear gave it a voice. Birds returned to the trees. Smoke rose from cooking fires rebuilt from what little remained. And at the edge of the village, beneath a woven canopy of leaves, The blind girl lay resting. She did not wake for a long time. When she finally did, it was to the sound of footsteps stopping carefully near her mat. The elder knelt beside her, hesitant now, stripped of authority. He did not speak at first. "You should rest," he said finally. She turned her face toward his voice. Her eyes were still sightless, but something in her expression had changed. The tension that once lived beneath her skin had softened, like a clenched fist finally opening. "The river is quiet," she said. "Yes," the elder replied. "Because of you." She smiled, small and tired. "Not because of me. Because it was heard." The village gathered later that day, not in judgment, not in fear, but in gratitude. They brought dry cloth, food, warmth. No one offered her water. They understood now. Children sat close to her, listening as she spoke, not of magic, not of sacrifice, but of patience. Of listening. Of what it means to carry something heavy so others don't have to. "The river isn't cruel," she told them. "It remembers everything given to it. Love, loss, bodies, promises." The elder cleared his throat. "Will it rise again?" She nodded. "One day. All things do. But not like this." The fields were replanted. The huts rebuilt farther from the river's edge. New paths were carved, paths that respected the water instead of challenging it. And the blind girl remained. She still never touched water. But now, no one asked her to. When drought came again years later, the river shrank, but never disappeared. When rain returned, it fed the land without fury. Balance had learned a new shape. Before she died, the blind girl asked to be buried far from the river, beneath the dry earth she loved. The villagers honored her wish. Yet sometimes, when the river ran low, elders swore they could hear a woman's voice in the current, not crying, not commanding, guiding. The children grew up knowing her story, told not as a warning, but as a lesson. Some lives are not meant to be understood quickly. Some sacrifices are invisible until they stop. And some people do not refuse the world because they hate it, but because they love it enough to carry its pain alone. That is why, in that village, they still say, "Respect the quiet ones. Listen to what is avoided. And never assume fear means weakness." Because once, long ago, a blind girl who never touched water held back a river, so everyone else could drink in peace.